Between the wars, women across the globe find rejuvenation in the ideal of the new woman. She can be found in magazines in smoky makeup, out dancing in the cities, or seen smoking a cigarette in the movies, dressed to complement her boyish figure. She is full of hope for a bright future. She is modern and fashionable, but most importantly, she is socially independent. In the USSR, when the new Soviet woman is promised her place in the state, she instead finds herself burdened with the roles of the tender guardian and the toiling worker. Fraught with two responsibilities, she will be far from liberated. This is On the Homefront, a sub-series of World War II in real time. I'm Anna Deinhard. After Vladimir Lenin seizes power of Russia in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, he is desperate to build his vision of a thriving socialist state. A character of the new Soviet individual emerges. They are to proudly uphold communist ideals, work tirelessly towards the industrial rebuilding of the nation to carry the USSR into the 20th century. But women, especially the majority in the working class, are the most oppressed section of society. But now, to fulfill the Soviet vision, Lenin needs both all the men and all the women. Speaking at the first Working Women's Congress in 1919, he promises a future where women will occupy the same position as men. You see, like in the West, tradition has confined the women to the home until now. She was to clean and care for her husband and children. But Lenin's unorthodox beliefs include that the men and women deserve to be more equal. Gender inequality is a force that, he says, crushes, strangles, stultifies and degrades the woman, chains her to the kitchen and nursery. For his revolutionary vision of society, it is barbarously unproductive and petty. So, in the early years of his government, he gets started on women's emancipation. Already in 1917, Bolshevik Russia becomes the first great power to grant women the vote. In 1918, divorce is liberalized and prostitution and abortion laws are loosened. So, in the eyes of the law, Soviet women are becoming more equal to their men. Close to Lenin are two feminist revolutionaries, Alexandra Kollontai and Inessa Armand, who have considerable sway over legislation. Kollontai is the People's Commissar for Welfare, or Minister of Welfare, which in fact makes her one of, if not the first, women to hold such a position in government in the world. Anyway, together they established the Neidell, the women's section of the Communist Party, in an effort to improve women's lives. They sent representatives to other government departments to suggest reforms for women's education and work, to encourage fairness and to stop exploitation. The new Soviet woman is at the forefront of their vision. Kollontai describes her like this. Instead of being submissive and lacking in personality, before us is no mere wife, no shadow of a man. Before us is an individual, a woman who is above all a person. The ideal takes flight in Soviet society in the magazines Rabotnica, the woman worker, and Krestyanka, the peasant woman. The new Soviet woman is advertised to the female population. But Lenin and his supporters sees this as a more than an ideal. It is an integral part of his socialist reform meant to modernize society. Collectivization will free up women to be productive workers. As Kollontai writes in 1921, in order to give women the possibility of participating in productive labor without violating her nature or breaking with maternity, it is necessary for the collective to assume all the cares of motherhood that have weighed so heavily on women, thus recognizing that the task of bringing up children ceases to be a function of the private family and becomes a social function of the state. So, the Neidell establishes public laundries, kitchens, and childcare centers to provide cleaning, food, and day-to-day care for children. These kind of institutions spring up everywhere. For instance, in only a few years, there's 200 new consultation centers for pregnant women to receive support. In the cities, these institutions quickly become heavily relied upon. In Petrograd, 90% of the population and 60% in Moscow are soon fed through communal kitchens. But while it may seem that the women of the Soviet Union hit the ground running towards gaining social, political, and economic equalities, this new system only shifts the gender roles as they are to the collective. Those contributing to the home and rearing to the community's children, the cleaners, cooks, nurses, and teachers are women. So children remain a female matter and her natural calling. In effect, all it does is shift women's traditional role into a public setting. The feminist efforts are not meant to liberate a woman for her own sake, but more for the sake of the smooth functioning of socialist society. Or, as Kollontai puts it, she no longer belongs to herself, she is serving the collective, producing from her own flesh and blood a new unit of labor. In other words, raising the next generation of workers. In any case, it's only a small part of women who gets a taste of the changes happening around them. The majority of the female population of 70 million is scattered across a huge body of land, in rural clusters and far away from many of these new services. But following Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin comes to power in 1927, and women are now called upon by the nation unlike ever before. Stalin is hellbent on getting the USSR equal in industrial strength to other world powers. In 1931, he proclaims, "We have fallen behind the advanced countries by 50 to 100 years. We must close that gap in 10 years." In 1933, Stalin's second five-year plan to rapidly industrialize skyrockets the demand for labor. It is a huge national effort that simply can't afford to exclude the female population. Between 1928 and 1937, 6.6 million women take on industrial jobs previously dominated by men. Women flock to the cities and take up positions in construction, railroads, mining, metallurgy, and machine production. In 1930, women only make up 28% of the industrial workforce. By 1937, they make up 42%. And now these changes start to transform the rural parts of the Soviet Union too, as mechanization and collectivization of farms transform rural women's lives too. So now the Soviet woman has a purpose outside the home, beyond her responsibilities as a caregiver. And while a woman's role in society becomes more similar to her husband, birth rates drop and family sizes decreases. So women are less dependent upon the household and the domestic workload is somewhat shared. And the reforms continue to restructure the family in the Stalinist era. In 1927, a new code on marriage, the family, and guardianship extends women's social rights to the home. Obtaining a divorce is now easier, which leads to such an increase that in cities 20% of married men and 17% of married women are getting divorced. In families who are desperately poor, easier divorces increases the risk of women being left as the only earner and carer for the family. As one journalist writes, "What sort of position is this woman in? Are her interests protected by the new code? Of course not." And just like in their personal lives, there's little security in Soviet women's new role as a worker too. Remember the Genotel that was established to protect women? Well, that's closed down in 1930. And as women enter industrial work, wages plummet by 49% between 1928 and 1932. If the number of workers double, but wages are cut in half. Well, I'll let you do the math. Clearly, women aren't experiencing any increased independence from their husbands. Instead, their jobs are making up for the man's smaller income. And as Stalin tries to stabilize the changing society, what little progress women have made to become independent is truly derailed. In June 1936, policies are passed to restore conservative family values. See, there are fears growing that the family unit is being neglected and that this will result in dwindling populations and less workers. So, obtaining an abortion or a divorce become a tougher task. Reinforcing their role as a mother, the state creates incentives for women to prioritize having children rather than going to work. For 7 or more children, a woman is granted 2,000 rubles per child for 5 years. Mothers with 11 children are granted 5,000 rubles per additional child for 1 year and 3,000 rubles for a further 4 years. As war looms and the industrial wheels spin faster and faster, true equality between Soviet men and women remains out of reach. The pre-revolutionary conception of the woman seemed to have prevailed over the new woman ideal. But the structure of society and the economy is increasingly relying on a woman's blood, sweat, and tears. First, she must carry her own family, then she is asked to raise the family of the nation, and finally, the nation requires her contributions to industrial production. Instead of equality, the socialist reforms have only added to the women's burdens, while men remain in their main roles as workers and soldiers, just like before the revolution. The socially liberated new Soviet woman is a hoax and only lives in illustrations of communist propaganda. And once the USSR will join the war, Soviet women will again be urged to take on yet another traditionally male burden, to join the war industries and even to become soldiers and face the horrors of battle. Now, I'll get back to Soviet women on the fronts in later episodes. If you want to know more about Stalin's industrialization, we have covered that in Between Two Wars right here. It is thanks to the Time Ghost Army that we can continue doing these series even in these trying times. Join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Subscribe and ring that bell. But most importantly, stay safe and stay healthy.